from poverty, illness, and desolation, so we may endeavor to lift them up to your light and relieve their sorrow with the purity of your love. Almighty Lord, hear our prayer. Amen.
Amen. Secretary, please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Hontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Subiri, Senate President Pimentel.
With 15 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 37th session, Monday, December 4, 2017, and consider the same as approved.
Is there any objection to the motion to dispense with the reading of the journal of Monday, December 4, 2017, and to consider the same as approved? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, I would like to welcome some guests in the gallery. The National Movement of Young Legislators, Dr. Nick Kachirovas, an elected city official of Illinois, Filipino members of the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative, and political officers from the U.S. Embassy, Manila. Also, the grade 12 students and teachers from the Bethany Christian School of Tarlac, headed by school principal Antonio Tagubuan, Jr. And the guest of Senator Pacquiao, the WBO International Featherweight Champion Mark Magnifico Magsayo, and Jane Kahesiap of Tagbilaran City, Bohol. Also, the Libas City College's graduate school headed by Dr. Leante Lubis, and also Bicol University students, Political Science Department headed by Dr. Rosemary Frias and Dr. Noemi Ibo. Mr. President, I'd like to welcome them to the Senate.
Welcome to the Senate.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, approved. Secretary.
Message from the House of Representatives, letter from the House informing the Senate that on 28 November 2017, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. House Bill number 6528, separating the Liloy National High School Patawag Extension in Barangay Patawag, Liloy, Zamboanga del Norte from the Liloy National High School to be known as Patawag National High School. 6529, separating the Calawit National High School Pianon Annex in Barangay Pianon, Calawit, Zamboanga del Norte from the Calawit National High School to be known as Pianon National High School. 6530, establishing a national high school in Barangay Katigan, Turil District, Davao City to be known as Katigan National High School. 6531, establishing a national high school in Barangay Sibulan, Turil District, Davao City to be known as Mount Apo National High School. 6532, establishing a national high school in Barangay Talisay, San Isidro, Davao Oriental to be known as Talisay National High School. 6533, establishing a national high school in Barangay Corporacion, Lupon, Davao Oriental to be known as Corporacion National High School. 6534, establishing a national high school in Barangay Magdog, Governor Generoso, Davao Oriental to be known as Magdog National High School. And 6535, establishing a national high school in Barangay Digon, Maragosa, Tubig, Zamboanga del Sur to be known as Digon National High School.
Referred to the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, and Finance.
House Bill number 6551, converting the Bicol Sanitarium in Cabusao, Camarines Sur into a geriatric medical center to be known as the Bicol Regional Geriatric Medical Center. House Bill number 639, providing for the establishment of a district hospital in Santa Elena, Camarines Norte, and House Bill number 1955, increasing the bed capacity of Rizal Medical Center in Pasig City.
To the Committees on Health and Demography and Finance.
2488, 2483, declaring July 4 of every year a special non-working holiday in Cadiz, Negros Occidental in commemoration of its Charter Day anniversary, and House Bill number 2484, declaring June 11 of every year a special non-working holiday in Sagay, Negros Occidental in commemoration of its Foundation Day anniversary.
To the Committee on Local Government.
House Bill number 2849, increasing the bed capacity of Veterans Regional Hospital in Bayombong, Nueva Vizcaya, changing its name to Region 2 Trauma and Medical Center.
To the Committees on Health and Demography and Finance.
6575, mandating the transfer of the Provincial Agrarian Reform Office in Sugod to the city of Maasin, Southern Leyte.
To the Committees on Agrarian Reform and Finance.
6577, establishing the Kalanguya Center for the 6th District of Pangasinan, 1st District of Nueva Ecija, and the provinces of Ifugao, Benguet, and Nueva Vizcaya.
To the Committees on Cultural Communities and Finance.
6584, Barlig Tourism Development Area Act.
To the Committees on Tourism and Finance.
6586, declaring Manok Island and Esperanza Masbate an ecotourism site, and House Bill 6587, Lingayen Golf Marine Ecotourism Park Act.
To the Committees on Environment and Natural Resources, Tourism and Finance.
6591, declaring November 8 of every year a special non-working holiday in the Eastern Visayas region to be known as Typhoon Yolanda Resiliency Day, and 6592, declaring February 24 of every year a special non-working holiday in Zamboanga, Sibugay in commemoration of its founding anniversary to be known as Araw ng Sibuga.
To the Committee on Local Government.
6607, separating the Lawa National High School Annex and Barangay Lapuan, Don Marcelino Davao Occidental from the Lawa National High School to be known as Luisa Joyce Malyari National High School, and 6608, separating the fishing village of Comprehensive National High School Annex in Barangay Manamalita, Davao Occidental, from the fishing village Comprehensive National High School to be known as Benjamin Velasco Bautista Senior National High School.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture and Finance.
6618, establishing a 100-bed capacity hospital in the Barangay Habay, 2 and Bacoor, Cavite to be known as the Bacoor District Hospital. 6620, increasing the bed capacity of St. Anthony Mother and Child Hospital in Cebu City. And 6621, increasing the bed capacity of the Adela Serati Memorial Medical Center in Tandag, Surigao del Sur.
To the Committees on Health and Demography and Finance.
6632, renaming the Puerto Princesa City South Road, stretching from the National Road at Junction 1, Puerto Princesa City, passing through Aborlan, Nara, Sofronio, Española, Barangay Rio, Tuba, and Batarasa at the East Coast, and turning back to Puerto Princesa City from the West Coast, again passing those municipalities up to Barangay Bacungan, Puerto Princesa, Palawan as Governor Alfredo M. Abueg National Circumferential Road.
To the Committee on Public Works.
6633, establishing an Area Equipment Service Office in the 2nd District Engineering Office of Sulu to be located in Luok.
To the Committees on Public Works and Finance.
And House Bill number 6634, renumbering the Cebu 1st, 2nd, and 4th District Engineering Offices to conform and correspond respectively with the numbering of the legislative districts in Cebu.
To the Committee on Public Works.
Bills on first reading, Senate Bill number 1625, an act establishing a retirement benefit system in the Office of the Ombudsman, augmenting its employee benefits and appropriating funds therefore by Senator Richard Gordon, J. Gordon.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights, Civil Service, Government Organization and Professional Regulation, and Finance.
As number 1626, an act further strengthening the Office of the Solicitor General by increasing its powers and functions and redefining, expanding, and rationalizing its organization, repealing for the purpose Republic Act number 9417, Republic Act number 2327, and Executive Order numbers 1 and 2, series of 1986, augmenting its employee benefits, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, by Senator Richard J. Gordon.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights, Civil Service, Government Reorganization, Professional Regulation, Ways and Means, and Finance.
1627, an act creating the Lake Lanao Development Authority, defining its powers, functions, and duties, and for other purposes, by Senator Richard J. Gordon.
To the Committees on Government Corporations and Public Enterprises, Economic Affairs, Ways and Means, and Finance.
Resolutions, proposed Senate Resolution number 556, directing the Committee on Public Services to conduct an inquiry and aid of legislation on the Public Utility Vehicle Modernization Program of the Department of Transportation, with the end in view of crafting an alternative policy to address the concerns of drivers and operators affected, and implementing a just transition and modernization program that will provide viable, efficient, fast, safe, and sustainable transportation systems in the country, by Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To the Committee on Public Services.
557, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the dengue immunization program of the Department of Health vis-a-vis the Sanofi Pasteur's new clinical findings on the vaccine dengue vaccination's adverse effects to its recipients, by Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To the Committee on Health and Demography.
558, congratulating the municipality of Sikatuna in the province of Bohol for celebrating its 100th foundation anniversary on December 05, 2017, by Senator Soto III.
To the Committee on Rules.
559, directing the Senate Committee on Environment and Natural Resources to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation in the impact of large-scale mining, particularly in the island of Manicani and Eastern Samar, with the end view of crafting legislative measures and other appropriate interventions for the utilization, management, development, conservation, and protection of the environment, by Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To the Committee on Environment and Natural Resources.
560, directing the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Food to conduct an immediate inquiry in aid of legislation into the status of the programs of the Philippine Coconut Authority consistent with the pursuit of the sustainable development of the coconut industry, by finalizing the Coconut Farmers Registry and Industry Roadmap, with the intention of promoting the coconut industry, increasing the income of the coconut farmers to bring them out of poverty, by Senator Cynthia A. Villar.
To the Committee on Agriculture and Food.
561, directing the Senate Committee on Public Works to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported faults in the system, if any, resulting to the misuse of government funds for its road right-of-way project covered by alleged spurious land titles in General Santos City, by Senator Emmanuel Manny D. Pacquiao.
To the Committees on Accountability of Public Officers and Investigations and Public Works. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, there is an urgent matter that Senator Manny Pacquiao would like to call to our attention. So I move that we recognize Senator Manny Pacquiao for a point of public interest, Mr. President.
Senator Pacquiao is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a manifestation that the primary referral of Senate Resolution 561 be referred to the Committee on Public Works, since we want to investigate on the faults of the system resulting into graft and corruption. Mr. President, last month, Justice Secretary Vitaliano Aguirre II released information that there are cases of false right-of-way claims in my hometown, General Santos City. This caused our government to lose at least 8.7 billion pesos, Mr. President. I'm very disappointed with these public officials who are nothing more than mere scammers, magnanakaw, kurakot. Hindi ito birong pera, Mr. President. Napakalaki nito. To be frank, I'm furious. If there is something that really causes my dismay, it is their intentional misuse of public funds, Mr. President. The same funds are supposed to be used for the development of the country and for the betterment of the lives of our countrymen, of the Filipino people. Hindi ko maintindihan kung paano nakakatulog ang mga taong ito ng mahimbing sa gabi, nang alam nila ang kalukuhang ginagawa nila. These actions are done by humans with no conscience, Mr. President. The 1987 Constitution clearly states that public officers and employees must at all times be accountable to the people. Serve them with utmost responsibility, integrity, loyalty, and efficiency. Act with patriotism and justice. And lead modest lives, Mr. President. Sadly, these people who were involved in such malicious acts failed to fulfill their duties as public servants. Mr. President, naniniwala ako na mayroong problema sa ating sistema kaya unti-unting lumilitaw ang mga lamat sa ating gobyerno. Funds for its road right-of-way project covered by alleged spurious land titles in General Santos City. We recognize that one of the inherent powers of the state is to appropriate any property for a public purpose. We certainly need to exercise this power to ensure the efficient delivery of services to the public. However, bypassing the law in the guise of public service is the ultimate act of hypocrisy. Mr. President, hindi ko masikmura ang galawang ito. Ang pirang galing sa buwes ng ordinaryong mamamayan napunta lang sa bulsa ng ilang alagad ng gobyerno. I believe that it is our duty as legislators to solve these faults in our system. Hindi pwedeng magwalang kibo tayong mga senador, mga legislators. Ang pirang pinag-uusapan ay halos 9 billion pesos, Mr. President. Ang pirang ito ay sapat na para makapagpatakbo ng isang syudad. Kailangan matigil ng ganitong uri ng kalakaran sa ating gobyerno. Sinisiguro ko na hindi tayo titigil hanggat hindi mananagot ang dapat managot. It is about time we fix our system for the development of our country. Mr. President, I repeat, I move to refer Senate Resolution 561 to the Committee on Public Works. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, before we act on the motion being posed by Senator Pacquiao, we would like to table the motion first. We would like to consult Senator Gordon, which committee is originally referred to, the Blue Ribbon. So, with the indulgence of Senator Pacquiao, we can do that later, Mr. President.
Is that okay with the good senator? The motion is to table or to defer acting on your motion. Okay. At any rate, the Committee on Public Works is the secondary referral as of the moment. Okay. So the motion of the Majority Leader is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move for the consideration of PS Resolution 558.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved. 558.
May we ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure, Mr. President?
Resolution congratulating the municipality of Sikatuna and the province of Bohol for celebrating its 100th foundation anniversary on December 5, 2017.
Founding anniversary.
Mr. President, may I be recognized to sponsor the resolution?
The Majority Leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, my esteemed colleagues. When we hear of the town of Sikatuna, Bohol, it is almost always associated with the first international treaty signed in the Philippines. This is the Blood Compact between Miguel Lopez de Legazpi and Boholano chieftain Dato Sikatuna. Now, unknown to many, Sikatuna Bohol was not named after Dato Sikatuna, but came from the Visayan phrase Sai Katona, which means on the third time. The name was to emphasize the significance of three elements that shaped the history of the town of Sikatuna. First is that the township was attained after 3 times of adopting a new name. Secondly, the town's municipal territory was redefined and changed then by law for the 3rd time. And lastly, the created town of Sikatuna is the third mother town after having been part of Baclayon and Albor. Thus, in celebration of their 100th founding anniversary, which is exactly today, Mr. President, on behalf of our colleagues, I would like to congratulate and recognize them for their significance in our history and their continued efforts to promote the welfare of the people of Bohol. So, dear colleagues, with the permission of everyone, I seek their support and ask that all members of the Senate present be made co-authors of the resolution, Mr. President, and therefore seek the approval of PS Resolution 558. I so move, Mr. President.
What's that, Senator?
The minority leader is seconding the motion.
Yes,
Mr.
but
President.
Senator Tiveros is also raising her hand.
Mr. President, good Majority Leader, I'm also seconding the motion of the good Majority Leader and thanking him for inviting all of us to be co-authors. May I just add that I agree 100% with his praise of our fellow Filipinos, the Boholanos, about the important role they've played in our history so far. And just to give one example that's always top of mind, is that it was the Boholano Filipino president, Carlos P. Garcia, who first popularized and championed the cause of Filipino first in the development of our national economy. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President.
So is there any objection to the motion of the Majority Leader? Okay, there being none, all senators here present are made co-authors of the resolution, and the resolution is adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move for the consideration of PS Resolution 562.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
May we ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure?
Resolution congratulating and commending Mark Magnifico Magsayo for defending his WBO International Featherweight title against the Japanese Shota Hayashi on November 25, 2017 in Tagbilaran City, Bohol.
Mr. President, to sponsor the resolution 562, we request to recognize Senator J.B. Ercito.
Senator Ercito is recognized.
Mr. President, colleagues, it is my honor to sponsor Senate Resolution number 562, entitled Resolution Congratulating and Commending Mark Magnifico Magsayo for defending his WBO International Featherweight title against the Japanese Shota Hayashi on November 35, 2017 in Tagbilaran City, Bohol. Mr. President, at the early age of 8, Mark already exhibited his interest for boxing. He turned professional. He had fought around 200 amateur contests and was awarded as 4-time amateur boxing champion at the annual Amateur Boxing Association of the Philippines National Tournaments. He started his professional boxing career on May 25, 2013, gaining his professional knockout win against Juan Melton Sandal. Currently, Mark Magnifico Magsayo holds a record of 18-0, with 13 of them by way of knockout. His unblemished professional boxing record is a proof of his remarkable talent, passion, and love for the sport. Last Saturday, November 25, 2017, Magnifico defended his WBO International Featherweight title against former Japanese domestic featherweight king Shota Hayashi in the manor of the Pinoy Pride 43 in Tagbilaran City. His exceptional performance is a true testament of the determination, perseverance, and strength of the Filipino, a source of inspiration of the youth and pride to all Filipinos, just like our very own Pambansang Kamao, our colleague Manny Pacquiao. Mr. President, in view of the foregoing, I urge that the Senate of the Philippines resolve to congratulate and commend Mark Magnifico Magsayo, who is with us today, for defending his WBO International Featherweight title against the Japanese Shota Hayashi on November 35, 2017 in Tagbilaran City, Bohol. That's all, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Senator Villanueva, Mr. President.
Senator Villanueva.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. This is just to join my distinguished colleague, my seatmate, to be one of the sponsors as well of this resolution. I recently watched the fight, Mr. President, at ipinakita ng ating kababayan yung pusong Pinoy na lumalaban hanggang huli. Just like our distinguished colleague here, I hope and pray that this commendation would motivate our distinguished hero from Tagbilaran City, that he would work harder and continue his quest to become a world champion. Thank you, Mr. President.
With that, Mr. President, I move that we adopt PS Resolution 562, subject to style.
Any objection? Hearing none, proposed Senate Resolution number 562 is hereby adopted, subject to style.
I may move for a 1-minute suspension so that the champion may join our world champion and Senator Ejercito, Senator Villanueva, to ascend to the rostrum to have a picture taken with the Senate President.
Session is suspended.
Halika. Sani, napanood mo ba? Napanood mo? Hindi ko napanood eh. Fight. Subject to style. Pirmahan ko na. Okay na ba? Tinanong ko si... Ano natin ito? Ano? Hindi ko... Tinanong ko si Ron. Ah. Ano ba kaya dito? Lumiliit na lumiliit yung size ng ano mo. Sige mo ah. Mark, halika, Mayor. This is the sponsor yata, si Mayor. Thank you. Saan si Mayor? Smile. Yung belt na nakita na? Ay, pakit-belt. Ikagano mo natin dito. Di ba erase yun, Manny? Kasi ito mo na ibinigay. Hawakan mo, Mark. Hawakan mo na sa'yo. Susuot ko. Kunting na pa na muna bago ka Nagbilaran ka na. Sige yan. Taas mo to. Ibay din ang ako eh. Pero defending to, di ba? Na-defend mo. Ikaw talaga champion. Siya talaga champion. Dami na niyang binigay eh. Kaya mo yung 8 weight divisions? Kaya? Kaya. Ilan ka lang, isa pa lang. Bito na lang. Kaya, dapat. 9, pati Senado. Titulars yun. Pala. Pala. Pabayaan mo muna si... After the election. Sino ba chairman nito? Ako? Hindi. Andun siya ikaw siya. Nakala ko. Kasi magsasubmit sila. Sa Jacob ang nag-receive. Sino ba chief of submit? material mo.
Manny, pagdating si Dick, hintay mo.
Andyan na ba?
Pagdating na raw si Dick, hintay mo. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, as promised yesterday, and with the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1299 under Committee Report 189.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
This is the proposed measure providing that 100% of the service charge collected in hotels and other establishments be distributed to all covered employees. The parliamentary status of the measure, Mr. President, is that we are now in the period of interpellation. So may I therefore move to recognize the sponsor of the measure, Chair of the Committee on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development, Senator Joel Villanueva, and to interpellate the Minority Leader, Senator Franklin Drilon.
The sponsor, Senator Villanueva, is recognized, and to interpellate the Minority Leader is also recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Mr. President, before we begin today's interpellation, I would just like to manifest my sincerest gratitude to my esteemed colleagues, especially to the Minority Floor Leader, for choosing to swiftly act on the passage of this particular measure under Committee Report number 189. Ikinagagalak po natin ang kagustuhan ng mayorya ng Senado, kasama ang minorya ng Senado, na makuha ng ating mga manggagawa sa service sector ng buo at walang bawas ang service charge na kanilang pinagtatrabahuhan at pinaghihirapan sa araw-araw. Mr. President, the enactment of this proposed measure will surely be a perfect Christmas gift for our hotel, restaurant, and similar establishment workers. And with that, I gladly await the questions and interpellations of my esteemed colleagues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, will the gentleman yield to just a few questions?
Gladly, Mr. President, especially from our Minority Floor Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, for the record, we have no objection to this measure and would join the sponsor in pushing for the passage of this bill. There are, however, certain clarifications which we want to spread into the record to guide the Department of Labor in implementing this measure. The first question, this is an amendment to Article 96 of the Labor Code. And upon amendment, the new provision will now read Article 96, Service Charges. All service charges collected by hotels, restaurants, and similar establishments shall be distributed completely and equally among the covered employees. Period. In case the service charge is abolished, the share of the covered employees shall be considered integrated in their wages. The first question, Mr. President, is who are covered employees?
In the, thank you for that question. In the IRR of the Labor Code, Mr. President, the employees covered are those working in hotels, restaurants, lodging houses, nightclubs, cocktail lounge, massage clinics, bars, casinos and gambling houses, and similar enterprises, including those entities operating primarily as private subsidiaries of the government that collect service charge. And it was also mentioned that the distribution would be among the rank and file employees. And this refers, Mr. President, to all employees not falling within the definition of managerial employee. I remember yesterday, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, when we were having a thorough discussion on this particular matter, we wanted to define who are these managerial employees which will be exempted from receiving these service charges. service charge funds. There's also a, for the information of the body and the minority floor leader, there's also a definition of the word managerial employee. And actually, we wanted to adopt this definition in the IRR of the Labor Code, which defines managerial employee, which means one who is vested with powers or prerogatives to lay down and execute management policies and or to hire, transfer, suspend, lay off, recall, discharge, assign, or discipline employees, or to effectively recommend such managerial actions.
So, bottom line is that this applies only to rank and file employees when we say covered employees.
Yes, Mr. President, distinguished colleague.
Would it include casual employees or only regular employees?
They are both included, Mr. President.
Regular and casual.
Yes, Mr. President.
What about agency employees?
Yes, Mr. President. That's what we wanted to accomplish.
The workers provided by an agency would be entitled to a share in the service charge. Is that what we are saying, Mr. President?
In the affirmative, yes, Mr. President.
This would include janitors, dishwashers, etc.
The cooks, the busboys, yes, Mr. President.
Now, what about those hired by job contractors who happen to work in the establishment?
Yes, Mr. President. They are also part of it.
I have a little problem with that, Mr. President. You hire a contractor to repair the air conditioning, the unit in a restaurant. The job contractor very clearly would have employees that will discharge the responsibility of the contractor in the contract. Are these workers also included in the definition of covered employees?
It's how do I explain it, Mr. President? This particular example perhaps would not be applicable because they are not imposing service charges, Mr. President.
No. In a restaurant,
Okay, in a
which
restaurant.
charges service charge, a contractor to repair an air conditioning unit or air
They are not.
conditioning units
Yes, I understand. Yeah.
would have their own employees. Are they covered employees in this definition?
No, Mr. President.
No.
Now I got the point
Yes.
of distinguished minority leader, and I apologize. They are not covered because the basis would be those who are providing service, direct service to the customers, Mr. President.
Okay. Now, so that only those, so that if they are employees of a labor contractor, they are covered employees.
Yes, as long as they are the ones implementing and doing the service, Mr. President.
Okay. And not only, and even those in the back,
Yes.
house.
What do you call that? Backstaff. Backstaff, Mr. President.
Yeah,
Yes, the cooks, the what else? Dishwashers, Mr. President. They are all included also.
Now, the provision says completely and equally distributed, meaning if there is 10,000, there is 10,000 as a total amount of service charge in a particular month, and there are 10 employees, it would be strictly 1,000 per employee.
Yes, Mr. President.
There is no distinction as to the degree of responsibility, as to the nature of work done?
Yes, Mr. President, you are correct.
Now, the present law provides that a ratio of 85% shall go to, the distribution shall be 85% to all covered employees and 15% for management. When we say 15% for management, presently, this is interpreted to mean that the 15% will cover breakages and losses. Is that correct? Presently.
Yes, Mr. President, it is in the IRR of the present labor code, but if you look at the labor code itself, it just say 15% for management. But in the IRR, it was explicitly stated that this will be for the disposition by management to answer for losses and breakages and distribution to managerial employees at the discretion of the management in the latter case.
To a certain extent, that would be favorable to the ordinary employees because they are not charged for any breakages regardless of whether or not they are at fault. Is that correct?
Somehow, yes, Mr. President.
Now, if we remove this distinction or the division of 85 and 15%, who will be responsible for the breakages that will happen in the course of the operation?
We feel, Mr. President, that the employer may claim the cost of breakages and losses as part of its ordinary business expense, which can be deducted from its gross income.
Now, if the employee is at fault, would the employer have the right to make the employee liable for these breakages? Or if he is grossly negligent, would the employer have the right to demand payment for these breakages?
Definitely.
Sorry, yes.
Definitely, Mr. President. I just heard the distinguished minority leader talking about gross negligence, for instance. As long as they undergo due process, Mr. President, then they would be held liable.
So isn't the present arrangement better that the 15% is charged, the breakages and losses is charged on the 15% and the worker is completely free from any liability?
Well, we feel, Mr. President, that the idea of having a service charge initiative the main idea there is to give the workers, the service workers, what is due them, and especially in rewarding them. If you would recall, Mr. President, we have been, as we mentioned yesterday, that this is also an optional initiative on the part of the business sector. If they don't want to implement the service charge, then they can do so, Mr. President.
Yeah, we realize that the law does not require service charge to be collected, and we will maintain that setup even after the amendment. Is that for the record?
Yes, Mr. President. Yes, Mr. President.
Now, what about tips voluntarily given on top of the service charge? Is that also subject to the 85, or is that also subject to the same provision here?
No more, Mr. President. It's not part of the service charge, Mr. President, being automatically deducted when a client eats in a restaurant, Mr. President.
Can we have it again for the record? A tip is not considered as a service charge for purposes of this definition.
No, Mr. President. It's not part of the service charge.
And the waiter who serves the table can completely keep that.
Yes, Mr. President, for himself. Depending on their, perhaps in normal situation, Mr. President, the waiters would pool the funds and at the end of the day, sila po yung maghahati-hati nito, Mr. President.
Can the employer promulgate a policy which will basically say tips in top of the service charge will be pooled, and from this amount, breakages incurred during the operation shall be charged to that tip, to the pool of funds which is generated by voluntary tips? Can that kind of policy be valid?
Can they? Yes or no muna? Well, Mr. President, I was given a handbook from the Department of Labor and Employment regarding tips. And it says here, where a restaurant or similar establishment does not collect service charges, but has a practice or policy of monitoring and pooling tips given voluntarily by its customers to its employees, the pooled tips should be monitored, accounted, and distributed in the same manner as the service charges.
I see. So, when we amend this law, that regulation would also be deemed amended, although it is not part of the service charge. In other words, what I'm saying is, presently, the way I understand that, that manual, if on top of the service charge, there is in the pool, say, 10,000 pesos as tips, presently, that will be split 85-15. That's what the law says today. Now, if we amend this law, that particular fund will no longer be split 85-15, but will completely be given to the employees.
The minority leader is correct, and that is the intention of our proposed measure, Mr. President.
Why is that so, sir, when these are not part of the service charge? This is not, this is voluntarily given to the employees in a restaurant.
Mr. President, may I ask for 1 minute suspension?
Session suspended.
Kasi, digay. We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Mr. President, during the break, this representation conferred with the minority leader about his question about that particular provision of the Department of Labor and Employment when a company or a restaurant, for instance, would implement such policy in pooling the tips. It will be treated, it's akin to a service charge. So when we amend this particular provision, we are also amending that particular provision when it comes to distribution of service charge fees, Mr. President.
All right. Again, just for the record, where there is no service charge, the losses arising from breakages or other other losses is absorbed by the employer unless it is shown that the worker is grossly negligent, in which case it can be disciplined. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. President.
Can he be charged with the cost of the breakage?
Yes, gross negligence, Mr. President, or pinakita na
Deliberate
yung act, Mr. President. Yes.
During the hearings that you conducted on this proposed bill, what was the view of the resource persons, particularly from both the labor and the employer sector?
From the labor sector, Mr. President, ang gusto nila i-enforce na ang lahat na establishments ay magpatupad ng service charge. On the part of the business enterprise, gusto nilang manatili, Mr. President, yung 15% para meron pa silang extra funds, Mr. President, para sa mga breakages and losses. So we came into agreement na mag-meet po halfway, and we feel that it's about time that we give what is due to our service workers by giving 100% of the total service charge being collected from the clients, Mr. President.
So, for the record, the gentleman informs the chamber that there is conformity on the part of the stakeholders insofar as this amendment is concerned.
I would say more of a compromise, Mr. President, distinguished colleague.
Oh, well, we have no more questions, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, and we thank the good sponsor for yielding the floor to clarify the intent of the measure in the record. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minority Floor Leader. Mr. President, again, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my esteemed colleagues, the Majority Leader, the Senate President, my seatmates who are also co-sponsor of this measure, for all your insights, opinions, and proposals that were given today, and as well as during yesterday's session, Mr. President, ikinagagalak po nating gusto na maging mas maayos itong panukalang batas na ito, at nawa maisabatas po natin ito sa lalong madaling panahon upang maging mas masaya ang Pasko ng ating mga kababayan at maging mas masagana ang papasok na kanilang bagong taon. Muli po, Mr. President, Ginoong Pangulo, maraming salamat po.
There are no more interpellators, Mr. President. I move that we close the period of interpellation.
Is there any objection? There being none, period of interpellation is closed.
I move that we open the period of committee amendments, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, the period of amendment is hereby open.
The individual amendment dito. Wala na.
Committee.
Yes, move to recognize Senator Villanueva for the committee amendments.
Senator Villanueva is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Thank you, Mr. President. As a result of our discussions and debate, may I introduce some committee amendments, Mr. President. On page 1, line 10, delete the word employees and replace it with workers, and insert the words except managerial employees. So move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On line 13, insert the following sentence. For the purpose of this article, managerial employees means those who are vested with powers or prerogatives to lay down and execute management policies and or to hire, transfer, suspend, lay off, recall, discharge, assign, or discipline employees or to effectively recommend such managerial actions. So move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
That would be all, Mr. President, distinguished minority.
Move to
Party
close the
leader.
period of committee amendments, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, period of amendments hereby closed.
There are no individual amendments, Mr. President. I move to close the period of individual amendments.
Is there an objection? The motion is carried.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading Senate Bill 1299 under Committee Report 189.
Is there an objection? There being none, Senate Bill number 1299 under Committee Report number 189 is hereby approved.
Thank you again, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Thank you to the Minority Leader and all my esteemed colleagues, especially Senator Gordon. Thank you very much.
We are supposed to tackle the bill by the presiding officer and Senator Ontiveros, but before we do that, and before the suspension, yes.
Membership ng minorities shall join.
Mamaya. Yeah. In the meantime, with the permission of the body, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special order Senate Bill 1616 under Committee Report 169.
Is there any objection? There being none, the motion is hereby carried.
I move to consider Senate Bill 1616 under Committee Report 169.
Is there objection? There being none, consideration of Senate Bill number 1616 under Committee Report number 169 is hereby in order.
May we ask Secretary to read the title of the measure?
An act amending Chapter 5, Section 85 of Republic Act Number 9593, otherwise known as the Tourism Act of 2009.
To sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chair of the Committee on Tourism, Senator Richard Gordon, be recognized.
Senator Gordon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon to everyone. As part of the Blue Ribbon Committee report, number 169, it proposes to amend the tourism law, Mr. President, because it is essential that we maintain our efforts at making tourism one of the principal engines of growth in our country. And unfortunately, although we passed this when I was first senator, the BIR and the Department of Finance failed to implement the tourism incentives provided for tourism infrastructure and enterprise zones. And that is why, Mr. President, we had several hearings in the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee on this matter and even suggested that there was malfeasance and misfeasance and unfeasance possibly for those officers who arrogated upon themselves to amend the law without, as an executive, Mr. President. And this is going on for so long that a law is created by Congress and then they either do not implement it or they simply ignore and try to deliberately not to implement it, Mr. President. Now, the policy, Mr. President, is that the state declares tourism as an indispensable element of the national economy and an industry of national interest and importance, which must be harnessed as an engine of socio-economic growth and cultural affirmation, to generate investment, foreign exchange, and employment, and to continue to mold an enhanced sense of national pride for all Filipinos, per Republic Act Number 9593, Section 2. Now, Mr. President, the Tourism Act specifically mandated the government to support the creation of tourism enterprise zones, which should provide the necessary vehicle to coordinate actions of the public and private sectors to address development barriers, attract and focus investments on specific geographic areas and upgrade product and service quality. TIESA was empowered to grant tax incentives to spur investments in sustainable tourism developments, and that the TIESA shall have sole and exclusive jurisdiction to grant the incentives hereinafter provided, and that the jurisdiction of the TIESA in the grant and administration of incentives shall not be impliedly repealed or modified. Among these incentives, Mr. President, are income tax holidays, gross income taxation of 5%, 100% exemption on all taxes, customs duties on the importation of capital equipment, and exemption of transportation and spare parts from tariffs and duties. The TIESA and the BIR entered into a memorandum of agreement signed on June 29, 2010, Mr. President, at the BIR's office in Quezon City, wherein it was agreed that BIR will issue the revenue regulations which should decide or which should facilitate the grant of incentives within 60 days from the signing date, which should be August 28, 2010. Despite, however, the enactment of the Tourism Act and the MOA, 7 years has passed. 7 years have passed without the law being implemented due to BIR's failure to issue the necessary revenue regulations for the fiscal incentives granted under Republic Act number 9593. TIESA has been unable to grant incentives to the 3 tourism enterprise zones it is already designated and approved. This really violates the rules on continuity and predictability of our laws. For example, Ciudad de Victoria and Santa Maria, Bukawi, Bulacan, which is the arena made by the Iglesia ni Cristo, Resorts World Manila in Newport City, Pasay, and Queen's Castle in Medellin, Cebu. Stalled and delayed, excuse me, Mr. President, stalled and delayed the development plans of many others, lost opportunities in the form of billions of dollars in investment and tourist expenditures. For example, the government only managed to secure 5.36 million international tourist arrivals for 2015, far short of a trajectory toward the 10 million targets for 2016. Loss of millions of jobs, for example, has happened. Out of the 25,000 jobs projected for several projects under TIESA, only 1,500 individuals were employed due to the delayed and slowed down development. Failure to put in place enforceable development plans that would manage the impact of tourism growth on communities and the environment. We therefore recommend this bill, SBN 1616, amend Chapter 5, Section 85 of Republic Act number 9593, otherwise known as the Tourism Act of 2009. This is part of our in aid of legislation. Section 85, Section 1, General Principles on the Grant and Administration of Incentives. The incentive scheme set forth in Section 86, 87, and 88 shall be in effect for a period of 17 years. Don't think it's 17 years. We're just extending it by another 7 years. In effect, making the 10 years happen, Mr. President, from the effectivity of this act, which is subject to review by the Joint Congressional Oversight Committee on Tourism. Which means, Mr. President, we're going back to the original 2010 original time when it was approved, Mr. President, and amending it to, because it was not approved, it did not happen in the last 7 years. We count from there and added another 7 years to make it to last until 2026. So it's not 17 years in actuality, it's just to prevent confusion, Mr. President. It's 10 years. Now, the original law contained 10 years, so we're just putting it back to where it must be. The second one that we said is public offices of public trust. However, as discussed above, the then BIR officials failed to perform and refused to perform the respective duties, such as the orderly and timely issuance of the agreed-upon revenue regulations. In this regard, the said officials committed nonfeasance, which is the omission of an act which ought to be done. Considering the acts committed by the respective public officials, proper legal action must be made in order to make the said officials liable as provided by Section 3F of the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act, or Republic Act number 1319, which states that neglecting or refusing after a due demand or request without sufficient justification to act within a reasonable time on any matter pending before him for the purpose of obtaining directly or indirectly from any person interested in the matter some pecuniary or material benefit or advantage, or for the purpose of favoring his own interest or giving undue advantage in favor of or discriminating against any other interested party, which constitute corrupt practices of any public officer and is therefore declared to be unlawful. Now, Mr. President, with respect to the necessity of the amendment, let me just point out, Mr. President, the following facts. If you will show it on the board, if you have the PowerPoint, our tourism performance has resulted in 8.6% of GDP. That is the contribution of tourism to the national economy, with a 12.3 annual growth. Tourism revenue is about 2.42 trillion, or 20% annual growth. Inbound tourism is 313 billion, or 8% of exports, and domestic tourism is 2.1 trillion, 19.8% of household consumption. Inbound visitors total 5.97 million, or a 9% annual growth. Domestic travelers, this is really a result of the WOW Philippines that has been continuously sustained to generate domestic tourism, has resulted in 79.3 million, or 16% annual growth. 5.22 million employed, and 12.8% of total employment, 4% annual growth, Mr. President. So this is not peanuts, Mr. President, and it could be bigger. And 1.8 million workers are working, people are working, or 33.6 of tourism workers have been added, Mr. President. Now, Mr. President, when you look at our performance vis-a-vis the whole world, it would appear that we are really not growing. We are really running in order to stay in place. We have remained second to the last in Asia, the last being Cambodia, Mr. President, and they're about to overtake us. And you can see that tourism growth is all over the whole world has been growing, and yet although we're growing, we have remained second to the last, Mr. President. And therefore, it is important that we bring back the incentives so that we could get more hotels, for example. Right now, there is a requirement of 216,000 existing beds as of 2015, or 9,329 accommodations. But the gaps are really wide, Mr. President. By 2022, there will be a gap of 128,000 rooms, Mr. President, or room gaps. So you can see the gap gets wider if we don't make it right away. 2018, there will be a gap of 85,000, 2019, 94,000, 2020, about 104,000, 2021, about 116,000, and 2022 is 128,000. So it is imperative, Mr. President, that we attain or retain the provision and expand it for another 10 years, because it has never been utilized, Mr. President. And if we utilize this, I submit, as I believe, about 8 years ago when I first sponsored this bill, this should have given a dramatic increase in tourism. Unfortunately, they did not do so. Unfortunately, they chose to be legislators masking themselves as legislators, but really they're executives, and they should not be monkeying around with the separation of powers clause, Mr. President. They have no choice but to implement this. However, Mr. President, there's good news. The BIR has already approved the revenue regulations have been released on 15 November 2016 during the hearing of the Blue Ribbon Committee. So now what remains, Mr. President, is to extend it for another 17 years, counting it from 2009, Mr. President. So don't be misled by the 17 years. It is really just retaining the original 10-year period, Mr. President. Having said that, Mr. President, I submit, and I hope that the body will support this worthy resolution so that we can add to the jobs, we can add to the foreign exchange, and we can finally get out of the second to the last, considering that Thailand has about 32 million tourists, considering that Malaysia has 26 million tourists, considering that Singapore has 12 million tourists, and I'm having this in my memory, and of course, Vietnam has 10 million tourists, and of course, the Philippines remains at 5.9 million tourists, and Cambodia is breathing down our necks at 5 million. So, Mr. President, it is now time to really support. Mr. President, I have been lucky in enforcing and making sure that we have these free port zones and tourism enterprise zones. You will recall we did Subic Bay here, and Subic Bay has been growing ever since, and we didn't lose any money in Subic Bay. It now has over 200,000 jobs and has contributed billions into the coffers. Same thing with Clark, which we also lobbied for and we re-sponsored as a free port zone, and they are now booming, Mr. President. We did the same for Mariveles, which we turned into a free port zone, and they now have an extra 40,000 jobs. I am pretty confident that when we do this, we will have a lot more tourists, and I think we can really make a lot more money for our people and provide them a future that they deserve. We are all natural. Our 643 islands, Mr. President, are just waiting. You know, you can see El Nido, all these islands, and there are many other islands that need tourism enterprise zones, especially in these greenfield areas where you can actually put in the investments that are needed, so that we could also provide the shipping and the interconnectivity, so that, you know, after a while, amazing Thailand would have lost its luster, although they will still have more tourists because they're used to it. And finally, while Philippines, and it's more fun in the Philippines, can find its place in really providing the original intention of providing jobs that will enable and ennoble the Filipino nation. That note, Mr. President, I end with a plea that we approve the measure, Mr. President. Thank you very much, and I will be ready to answer questions.
Mr. President, to give time to the members to study the committee report and the proposed Senate bill, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1616 under Committee Report 169.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion's carried.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of PS Resolution number 8 under Committee Report 165.
Any objection? Motion's carried.
This is the resolution on awarding of housing units to qualified beneficiaries. The parliamentary status of the measure was still in the period of interpellation. So I move to recognize the sponsor, Chair of the Committee on Urban Planning, Housing and Settlement, Senator J.B. Hercito.
Senator Hercito is recognized.
Mr. President, the last time we already started with the period of interpellation, and just like to, and likewise, there's nobody that registered to interpellate for this afternoon, Mr. President.
There are no more interpellators, Mr. President, so I move to close the period of interpellation.
Is there any objection? Motion's carried.
I would like to open the period of amendments if there are any committee amendments on the resolution.
There are no committee amendments, Mr. President.
Move to close the period of committee amendments, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion's carried.
There are no individual amendments. I move to close the period of individual amendments.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion's carried.
Mr. President, I move to adopt the resolution with its findings and recommendations under Committee Report 165. Move to adopt. Maybe 1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
1 minute suspension.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Well, we have just been informed that this is a joint resolution, Mr. President. So, and if there are no individual amendments, we first approve this on second reading.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion's carried.
Then I move to suspend consideration of PS Resolution 8 under Committee Report 165.
Any objection? Motion's carried.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1537 under Committee Report 145.
Any objection? Motion's carried.
Mr. President, this is the measure on the Healthy Nanay and Bulilit Act. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're in the period of individual amendments, considering that this is a substitute bill. So may I therefore recognize the sponsor, Chair of the Committee on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality, Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Senator Hontiveros recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader.
There are no other individual amendments, so may I move that we recognize the Majority Leader, Mr. President.
We recognize the Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the distinguished lady accept some individual amendments to enhance the measure further, Mr. President?
Certainly, Mr. President.
But allow me first to just ask one simple question before I propose my amendment. My amendment will be on Section 7 of the bill. May I know from the sponsor what the bill means by the phrase utilization of responsible parenthood and family health services? Yeah, yesterday, the Senate President and I were both quizzical on what we mean by this, Mr. President. Section 7, this is page 10.
Page 10, Mr. President.
Diba? Page 10 ba? Yes. Page 10, line 3 and 4. Counseling on and utilization of responsible parenthood and family health services.
Yes, Mr. President. This is under the section on women about to give birth and immediate postpartum period. So letter I here, number 2, letter I, counseling on and utilization of responsible parenthood and family health service would mean specifically, for example, all the health precautions that the expectant mother needs to observe in order to give birth to a full-term and healthy infant, and also the health practices she must undertake and also undertake for her newborn child in the immediate postpartum period in order to ensure recovery from the rigors of pregnancy and delivery, and then also under the ongoing program of the Department of Health to be able to continue with their husband or partner to plan their family. That is, to plan if and when they will have another baby, what the birth spacing will be, etc. And also, Mr. President, in the immediate postpartum period, to undertake breastfeeding for her child, including specifically exclusive breastfeeding in the first 6 months of life, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Therefore, so that these sub-paragraphs or paragraphs will be clear and consistent with the existing law, particularly the reproductive health law, and to avoid the inclusion of say, abortifacients or illegal methods in the implementation of the measure, may I propose the following amendments. So on page 10, lines 3 and 4, instead of the phrase responsible parenthood and family health services, delete and replace it with modern methods of family planning and access to reproductive health care services, comma, as defined in Republic Act number 10354, otherwise known as the Responsible Parenthood and Reproductive Health Act of 2012.
Mr. President, noting that the spirit and the letter of the law and also this draft is consistent with only legal and non-abortive fashion reproductive health and responsible parenthood methods, I gladly accept the proposed amendment of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Madam Sponsor. Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion's carried.
Also, therefore, then, on page 11, lines 24 and 25, also replace the phrase responsible parenthood and family health services with modern methods of family planning and access to reproductive health care services as defined in Republic Act number 10354, otherwise known as the Responsible Parenthood and Reproductive Health Act of 2012.
To be consistent with the earlier accepted amendment, Mr. President, once again gladly accepted.
Any objection? The amendment's carried.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Now, one final item. May I know the intention of the sponsor for including on Section 8 on health and nutrition of adolescent girls in the measure, considering that from the long and short titles of the bill, it can easily be drawn out that the primary objective of the measure is to scale up the nutrition for the first 1,000 days of life, no? That is approximately up to 2 years of age. Now, why only girls?
Sorry, Mr. President.
Well, I find the intention of the sponsor, in fact, laudable to include this group as beneficiaries, but we hope to further secure the health and nutrition of girls, no? Who will be future childbearers and will ultimately redound to the benefit of their child or would-be child or children. So, may I propose an amendment then, Mr. President, in the title, para ma-include, ano? After the word life, insert a comma and the phrase, including girls in age of adolescence.
I'm sorry, Mr. President, are we still talking about the title of Section 8 or
Title of the bill
the title
already.
of the bill?
Yes, Mr.
I see,
President.
Mr. President.
Because I have no problem with your Section 8.
Thank you,
I just
Mr.
wanted
President.
it reflected in the title, if you will so allow, Mr. President.
Again, Mr. President, only first noting that the bill was originally for healthy bulilit, but in the good legislative process that ensued starting from the committee hearings, it was expanded to be healthy nanay and bulilit, and then included there Section 8, health and nutrition of adolescent girls, because as we in the Senate are also trying to address to another bill, the Teenage Pregnancy Prevention Bill, we would rather that Filipinas become mothers at the right age, and we address more effectively the sad continuing incidence of teenage pregnancy. Still right now, there are adolescent girls who become teenage mothers. But since they get into this situation, we need to provide for their health and nutrition. So once again, and I'm glad for the third time today to accept the proposed amendment of the good majority leader.
Any objection? The amendment's carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are no further individual amendments on my part. If there are no other, yes, the Senate President, Mr. President.
Senate President's recognized.
Thank you, good majority leader.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. If the gentle lady from Akbayan will entertain a possible amendment depending on how I am enlightened with this issue.
Gladly, Mr. President.
On page 20, lines 5 to 7, this provision prohibits, am I correct in understanding, prohibits the donation of milk formula, breast milk substitutes, and or other products covered by the Milk Code before, during, and after a disaster. Is that correct, Madam?
As a general rule, Mr. President, yes, such are prohibited.
But then, lines 8 to 11, the first sentence of the following paragraph, does it allow the donation of the said products, milk formula, breast milk substitutes, and or products covered by the Milk Code in emergency situations after a disaster?
Mr. President, the following paragraph on page 20, lines 18, I'm sorry, lines 8 to 11, yes, are an elaboration of the previous paragraph. Donations or assistance from the private sector with no conflict of interest under the Milk Code, meaning private sector entities who are not producing, distributing, and potentially donating milk formula, breast milk substitutes, or products covered by the Milk Code. Such other private sector entities, of course, will be allowed.
Yes, the private entities
with no conflict of interest.
Yes, will be allowed to donate the milk products.
No, Mr. President.
Still not.
Still not, Mr. President. So we are presuming here that just as manufacturers of milk formula, breast milk substitutes, and other products covered by the Milk Code shall be prohibited to donate, other producers of other products may be allowed to donate.
Yes, I will focus on the products which cannot be donated. So, lines 8 to 11, that first sentence of that paragraph, still, in an emergency situation, after the calamity, still you cannot donate. Is that clear? You cannot donate the milk formula, breast milk substitutes, and or products covered by the Milk Code.
Yes,
is that
Mr. President.
Correct reading?
That is a correct reading, Mr. President, and there are at least 3 major reasons why such donations are prohibited, and there are in fact alternate or alternative donations that private sector may donate in the immediate aftermath of disasters.
That's what I want to hear now.
Yes, Mr. President.
Because my initial reaction or proposal was really to delete the proposed deletion of lines 5 to 7 and allow the donation in effect of milk formula, breast milk substitutes, and or products covered by the Milk Code before, during, and after a disaster. Or if before is too much, then maybe during and after a disaster. Because from personal experience, when Sendong hit Cagayan de Oro, of course we brought relief goods there. The request would be for milk, and we did not bring because we knew that DOH discouraged and DSW discouraged and or prevented the donation of milk. So may I know the rationale behind this policy to prohibit the donation of the said products?
Yes. I'm glad, Mr. President, that our interpellation is continuing, and I am hoping that the good Senate President will not propose such an amendment, and that we will have a meeting of minds instead, because I would not be able to accept such an amendment, but only because, for in the first instance, the Department of Health not only discourages such donations, but has actually embodied this as one of the elements in the Milk Code or Executive Order 51. And there is an interagency committee chaired by the Secretary of Health and joined as well by the Secretaries of Trade and Industry, Justice, and Social Welfare and Development, overseeing the implementation of the Milk Code. Also, and including in times of disasters and calamities. I mentioned earlier, Mr. President, there are 3 major reasons that the donation of milk formula in and even in emergency situations is prohibited. These are the requirement of potable water, the undermining of breastfeeding, and the issue of sustainability. Mr. President, the use of milk formula and breast milk substitutes in disasters will require the use of potable water, which in such situations is not readily accessible. Alternatively, mother-baby friendly spaces come into play during times of response to mitigate hunger and malnutrition in mothers, infants, and young children. And these mother-baby-friendly spaces, Mr. President, or MBFSS, they are not mere theories or models. Based on the Philippine government experience during Yolanda and during the Marawi siege, such mother-baby-friendly spaces played an important role in managing the nutrition of mothers and children. Per experience specific to Leyte and Buruun in Lanao del Norte, where the first mother-baby friendly space was established during the Marawi siege, relactation is even possible. We focus first on the provision of food, so food to the mothers, including the nursing mothers. So the statement, people do not have access to food, should tell DRRM managers and implementers that provision of food should be a top priority in DRRM alongside securing safe spaces. Because if the mothers can be supported to cook and to eat nutritiously, even in evacuation centers, through the donation of alternative products, kitchen utensils, cooking fuel, ingredients for food, or ingredients for cooking, or raw, healthy or cooked and healthy food, then the mothers will be able to sustain their own nutrition and they will be able to nurse their babies. Second substantive reason, Mr. President, that we prohibit donating milk formula in emergency situations, the undermining of breastfeeding. The acceptance of milk donations undermines the importance of breastfeeding as the safest, most reliable, and sustainable source of nutrition for infants, even in evacuation centers, where in fact, because of the lack of potable water, the first reason I cited, infants could develop gastrointestinal diseases because of not cleanly prepared and administered milk formula. The introduction of breast milk substitutes and or infant formula in emergencies and disasters creates dependency on the end user, which must be sustained after the recovery phase, creating further economic burden. Sa halip na yung libreng gatas ng ina, yung kailangang gastusan na milk formula. Take note, Mr. President, according to the DOH, there are other interventions available to the government to ensure that breastfeeding is sustained. And again, even in evacuation centers, for example, exclusive breastfeeding. If not possible, then promotion of wet nursing or cross nursing, or provision of expressed breast milk through cup feeding or spoon feeding. Or fourth, provision of donated pasteurized breast milk from human milk banks through cup feeding or spoon feeding. These interventions must be the focus of responders and managers of emergency situations. And last, sustainability issue, Mr. President. This is the other concern. Suppose we allow these donations and they're used in emergencies. Who will now give these families, mostly poor families who are the first to be displaced into evacuation centers, who will now give them new supplies of formula milk and breast milk substitutes when the emergency situation is resolved and the dependency on these products is established? Will the companies or organizations who donated these products be around to continue supplying them or to make an effort in making these infants go back to breastfeeding? Probably not, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I see the point of the three reasons given by the sponsor, but especially the potable water reason. But as to the next 2 points, precisely we are talking about an extraordinary situation where life is not normal. Therefore, it's not really undermining breastfeeding because the policy is there. Once we are back to normal, we can observe the policy. Sustainability, this is only temporary. So if the potable water issue can be addressed, then we should allow, I believe that we should be able to allow milk formula, breast milk substitutes, and some other milk products because of the emergency nature of the situation. we all know it's a temporary situation because it's an emergency situation. It's a stressful situation. So mothers may not be able to produce milk, plus the privacy issue because of the number of people in the evacuation center. So I'm glad to encounter the concepts of the mother-baby friendly space. That assumes maybe that there's also a privacy for the mother to breastfeed the child. But can this really be carried out in an evacuation center with thousands of people crammed in limited space? And I also heard about possible donation of pasteurized breast milk. Did the sponsor say that? And,
yes, Mr. President, from human milk banks.
And in the past, in the evacuation centers, are there really documented instances of donation of pasteurized breast milk? And where did this come from? And were they sufficient?
Yes, Mr. President, there have been occasions that pasteurized breast milk from human milk banks was made available. I'm just getting the exact data now, where and when these were utilized. And if I may just address the privacy issue, as I mentioned earlier, in Leyte and in Buruon, Lanao del Norte, these mother-baby friendly spaces with enough privacy for nursing mothers to continue or to again nurse their babies even during and after the trauma was facilitated. Definitely, disasters and displacement are very stressful situations. So let's not add to that by further loading the parents with the burden of looking for and preparing clean, potable water. Breastfeeding is also a known and quite one-of-a-kind way that stress relief and some form of relaxation, some degree of it anyway, can be gained by the mother and the child during that bonding moment. Also, Mr. President, if we believe that once we are back to normal, we can go back to breastfeeding, unfortunately, this is not really borne out by experience. Once the breastfeeding process is interrupted, it is doubly difficult to restart it, because the baby has gotten used not only to a different food, but to a different mode of ingesting the food compared to from the breast, then to an artificial bottle nipple. Also, the mother has, in the time that the milk formula intervened in the natural breastfeeding process, the mother's body lost that natural stimulation of her breasts and the milk glands from the sucking action of the baby. And that would also lead to a diminution of the volume of breast milk that she is able to, again, give her baby. It is not impossible, but it is doubly difficult. And we know how inertia can set in and prove a discouragement or a disincentive to return to breastfeeding. And one more point at this point, Mr. President, breast milk remains to be the standard food for infants and young children during emergencies and disasters. The use of breast milk substitutes and artificial milk formula products are known to pose a higher risk of infections such as diarrhea and pneumonia, especially, as we discussed earlier, in the absence of clean potable water and sanitary facilities.
But when the babies also consume this pasteurized, donated pasteurized breast milk, they consume this from bottles, right? So, Mr. President, so this is also a different mode of consuming milk.
The mode that I mentioned earlier, Mr. President, was through cup feeding or spoon feeding. And yes, even infants are able to be fed, if not yet by cup feeding, that's older babies, through spoon feeding. Yes, Mr. President.
Which we could do with milk formula also.
But there's nothing like breast milk.
Yes,
that's
correct.
From the breast or expressed or pasteurized breast milk.
Mr. President, we agree with the established policy. It's just that in an emergency situation, we are not making an exception from the policy. So we are very strict with the policy. So, well, will the sponsor be able to tell us how come when we go to evacuation centers and bring relief goods, why do we encounter requests for milk? So isn't this an indication of the need of the evacuees for this product which they are requesting from the donors?
Probably, Mr. President, basically at its heart, it is a request for support to be able to continue feeding their children.
Okay.
And because of the strength, the onslaught of advertising about these milk formulas and breast milk substitutes, which was not included or is not included in the milk code as prohibited, maybe in the stress of a certain situation, that request may be heard from the lips of displaced persons. But there are also those cases, as I mentioned, in Leyte, in Buruun, Lanao del Norte, just two of the many other examples, that with the proper information about the milk code and with the facilities like the mother-baby friendly spaces and the actual support to directly breastfeed or to give through spoons and cups expressed or pasteurized breast milk, there is a preference for that, Mr. President. So it's, I think there's also a role to be played in terms of information and education. Not the information or education that breast milk is best, every mother knows that almost intrinsically, but that even under the worst circumstances, there is assistance for mothers to be able to continue to give this best food to their babies.
There's no debate, Mr. President. The best food for babies would be mother's milk, and that's agree. But well, anyway, I accept especially the first reason, the danger, because to consume the milk products we have to mix it with the water, and given the emergency situation, that maybe water, the quality of the water would be questionable. So, but in the meantime, I will continue to, my office will continue to review the rationale behind the policy, and maybe if we can improve the provision of potable water to evacuees, then if we can ensure that, then maybe we can, it's time to revisit the policy as to emergency situations. But, Madam Sponsor, I'm only looking at the emergency situation. But I agree with the policy. The policy is we should promote, of course, mother's milk for infants. So thank you very much for entertaining my questions. I will no longer propose any amendment.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you, good Senate President.
Mr. President, I was about to move to close the period of individual amendments, but I received a note from Senator Recto that he will be amending, proposing amendments to the Healthy Nanay Bulilit Act next week, Mr. President. So I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1537 under Committee Report 145.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion's carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader.
Thank you. Mr. President, the minority has no member in the Joint Congressional Power Commission. So Senator Gatchalian, in coordination with the minority leader, has asked that Senator Bam Aquino be elected as a member.
So Senator Aquino is
Yes.
so elected as designated as member of
The minority
for
in
the minority in the Joint
Joint
Power
Congressional Power Commission.
JCOC on power.
Senate Bill 1354, Mr. President, is the Mental Health Act. And there are disagreeing provisions with the Senate version and the House version. So we have to create a bicameral conference committee. May I request that the Senate President designate the members of the committee?
Pursuant to Section 35 of the Rules of the Senate, I hereby designate the following as members of the Senate panel. In the Conference Committee on the Disagreeing Provisions of Senate Bill Number 1354 and House Bill 6452, or the Mental Health Act of 2017. Chairman would be Senator Ejercito. Members, Senators Soto, Angara, Ontiveros, and Aquino.
Thank you, Mr. President. Move to adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, December 6, 2017.
Is there any objection? There being none, session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, December 6, 2017.